One morning, Gregor Samsa wakes up from disturbing dreams and realizes something terrifying. He is no longer human. His body has transformed into a grotesque insect. His limbs, his voice, his very existence, completely unrecognizable. But the real horror? It's not his transformation. It's how the people who once loved him react to it. Franz Kafka's The Metamorphosis is often seen as a surreal tale of transformation. But beneath the surface, it's something much darker. A story about fear, alienation, and the brutal reality of human nature. Why does Gregor's family, who once depended on him, turn against him so cruelly? Why does society reject those who no longer fit its expectations? And most importantly, what does this story reveal about us? Get ready, because today we're diving into one of the most disturbing truths of Kafka's masterpiece. Gregor Samsa was once the perfect son. A hard-working traveling salesman, he spent his life supporting his family financially. He was their provider, their foundation, their reason for comfort. But when he wakes up as a giant insect, everything changes. His sister Greta initially shows him kindness. She brings him food, checks on him. But as the days pass, her compassion fades. His mother, torn between love and horror, cannot bear to look at him. And his father, once dependent on Gregor's money, now treats him like a monster. Gregor is no longer a son, no longer a brother, no longer a human being. He is something to be locked away. But here's the real question. Was Gregor ever truly loved? Or was his value only tied to what he could provide? This is where Kafka's genius becomes clear. Because the metamorphosis is not just about a man turning into a bug. It's about how society treats those who can no longer serve a purpose. And when you think about it, doesn't that sound eerily familiar? Sigmund Freud, one of the most influential thinkers in psychology, had a theory. Fear, when left unchecked, quickly transforms into anger. And Kafka brings this to life through Gregor's family. At first, they're afraid. His presence unsettles them. His new form is grotesque, unnatural, but soon fear turns into frustration. Frustration turns into resentment, and resentment turns into cruelty. His sister, once his closest ally, begins to ignore him. She stops bringing food, stops checking on him. His father, he doesn't just ignore Gregor, he attacks him. One night, in a fit of rage, he throws an apple at Gregor, wounding him severely. The injury festers. It weakens Gregor, and ultimately, it leads to his slow, painful death. But let's pause for a second. Think about how society treats the weak, the disabled, the unemployed, the sick. When someone can no longer perform, when they no longer meet expectations, how do we react? With kindness or with impatience? This is where Kafka's message becomes even darker. Gregor's transformation is not just a physical change. It's a metaphor for what happens when someone becomes useless to society. And the truth? People don't like being reminded of what they fear. They don't want to see sickness. They don't want to face suffering. They don't want to be near those who make them uncomfortable. And so, just like Gregor's family, they turn away. But here's the real twist. Gregor himself begins to accept his isolation. At first, he clings to the hope that his family still loves him, that they will see past his monstrous form. But as time passes, Gregor stops fighting. He starts hiding under the couch when his sister enters the room. He feels ashamed of himself. Sound familiar? That's because Kafka is tapping into one of the most universal human emotions, shame. Shame is a powerful force. It controls how we act, how we think, how we see ourselves. We feel shame when we fail, when we lose a job, when we don't meet expectations. And over time, that shame turns into something even worse, self-hatred. Gregor stops eating. He stops moving. He stops trying. Because the real horror of the metamorphosis is not just that Gregor's family abandoned him, it's that he abandoned himself. Here's something to think about. Is Gregor really the monster in this story? Or is it his family? Because once Gregor finally dies, do they mourn him? They move on immediately. They go out for a stroll. They talk about their futures. They talk about Greta finding a husband. Gregor's death? Just an inconvenience that needed to be removed. And Kafka is making a brutal point here. The real monsters are not always the ones with claws and fangs. Sometimes they are the ones who stop caring. But what does this mean for us? Because if this story reflects real life, then how do we make sure we don't become like them? Want more? This story isn't over. Not even close. Because Kafka's The Metamorphosis is not just about Gregor. It's about all of us. It's about the way we treat the weak, the way we deal with discomfort, the way we let fear turn into cruelty. And there's still so much more to explore. How does Kafka's philosophy connect to modern society? What does this story reveal about our obsession with productivity? And most importantly, how do we escape the fate of Gregor Samsa? If you want answers, watch the next video. But be warned, it might change the way you see the world forever. Click at your own risk. Let me know if you want me to expand or add anything. The infinite script continues as long as you need. Gregor Samsa's transformation isn't just a bizarre fantasy. It's a reflection of a terrifying reality. Because whether we realize it or not, we are all Gregor Samsa at some point in our lives. Think about it. You dedicate yourself to a job for years, believing it gives you purpose. Then one day you're fired. You're no longer useful. How do people around you react? You suffer an illness or an accident that changes the way you live. Suddenly, people start treating you differently, as if you are no longer the same person. You age, and the world moves on. The younger generation takes the spotlight, and suddenly your opinions, your presence, feel invisible. Gregor's transformation into an insect is not just physical. It's a metaphor for social irrelevance. And here's the scary part. We live in a world that glorifies productivity and punishes vulnerability. If you can't work, if you can't produce, if you don't fit into a specific role, you are discarded. And Kafka saw this long before our modern world. But now, with automation, job layoffs, social media, and burnout culture, this theme is more relevant than ever. So let's ask the real question. If society only values people based on what they can provide, what happens when you can no longer provide? And even worse, what happens when you start believing you are worthless? Gregor Samsa's greatest tragedy isn't that he became an insect. It's that he still thought of himself as just a worker. Even after his transformation, what's his first thought? I'm going to be late for work. He doesn't think about his condition. He doesn't question his existence. He just worries about his job. Sound familiar? That's because Kafka understood something that many of us struggle with today. We have been conditioned to tie our self-worth to our productivity. Think about how many people define themselves by their work. I am a lawyer. I am an engineer. I am a business owner. But what happens when that title is taken away? If you lose your job, who are you? If you can no longer do what you once could, do you still have value? Gregor couldn't answer this question. And because of that, He lost himself before his family even abandoned him. And this leads to the next terrifying realization. Let's talk about isolation. Because Gregor Samsa's story isn't just about rejection, it's about loneliness. And let's be real. Even though we are more connected than ever, people are lonelier than ever. Studies show that loneliness has become a public health crisis. More people report feeling disconnected, even in crowded cities. Social media has created an illusion of connection while deepening emotional distance. The rise of remote work has left people with fewer meaningful, in-person interactions. Gregor was physically trapped in his room. But today, millions of people are trapped in their own minds, feeling unseen, feeling unheard, feeling like they don't matter. And this is exactly why Kafka's story still resonates. Because the pain of Gregor Samsa is not fiction. It is real, universal, and happening all around us. Now let's talk about Gregor's family. Because if there's one lesson from the Metamorphosis, it's this. Love is often conditional. At first, Gregor's family adores him. He is the breadwinner, the one who supports them. But once he loses his ability to provide, how do they react? His father beats him. His sister Greta, once kind, abandons him. His mother, too weak to stand up for him, lets it happen. And when Gregor finally dies, they move on instantly. No mourning, no reflection, just relief. Because to them, Gregor was never truly a son. He was a function. And once he could no longer fulfill that function, he became disposable. This is where Kafka's critique of familial obligation becomes chillingly clear. Because here's a hard truth. Not all families are built on unconditional love. Some are built on transactional relationships. I love you because you take care of us. I love you because you make us look good. I love you because you fit into the role we expect you to play. But what happens when you stop playing that role? Will the love remain? Or will you, like Gregor, become an inconvenience? Let's be brutally honest. The Metamorphosis forces us to confront something we don't like to admit. Humans can be incredibly cruel. And not because they are evil, but because they are selfish. We reject what makes us uncomfortable. We abandon what no longer serves us. We turn away from things that remind us of our own vulnerabilities. Gregor's story isn't an exception. It's a reflection of how people behave when faced with the unfamiliar. And that's what makes the Metamorphosis so terrifying. Because when you strip away the surrealism, it's just a story about people being people. And that's far scarier than any horror novel. Now here's the real question. If we are all, at some point, Gregor Samsa, how do we make sure we don't end up like him? Because if Kafka's story teaches us one thing, it's that isolation kills. Self-worth built only on productivity is dangerous, and the people we trust most may not always be there when we need them. So, what do? Redefine your self-worth. You are not just your job, your productivity, or your ability to provide. You are more than that. Build connections beyond obligation. Don't wait until you are in crisis to find people who truly value you. Recognize who truly cares for you. Love that is conditional is not real love. Don't let fear turn into cruelty. If Gregor's family had chosen empathy over fear, his fate could have been different. And finally, remember this story, because the Metamorphosis is not just about Gregor. It's about all of us. If this video made you think, you're not alone, because there's so much more to uncover. Want to know how Kafka's philosophy connects to modern work culture and our obsession with status? Then you need to watch my next video. But be warned, it might make you rethink everything. Click at your own risk.